Wealth, when built on rights alone, tends to fragment. It disperses. It loses direction. It becomes a collection of personal claims rather than a structured system. Each individual asserts ownership, but few assume responsibility for what follows. Over time, the structure weakens, not because resources disappear immediately, but because no one is tasked with preserving them beyond the present moment. The Hebrew texts approach this differently. They do not begin with rights, they begin with obligations. This is not an incidental feature of the system, it is foundational. When the Torah introduces its laws, it rarely frames them in terms of entitlement. It does not say, "You are owed this." It says, "You shall do this." The language is directional. It points outward, toward action, toward responsibility. This pattern appears across domains: family, land, commerce, time. Each area is structured not around what an individual can claim, but around what he must uphold. At first glance, this may appear restrictive, a system of demands, of duties imposed from above. But the structure reveals a different logic. Because obligation, when applied consistently, creates continuity. Rights, when emphasized without balance, often create division. To understand this, we must begin with the family. In the book of Deuteronomy, there is a recurring emphasis on transmission. You shall teach them diligently to your children. The instruction is not framed as a right of the child to receive knowledge. It is framed as a duty of the parent to provide it. The responsibility is clear, and the parent is not merely a provider of immediate needs, he is a transmitter of knowledge, of structure, of values. This creates a chain. Each generation receives not as a passive beneficiary, but as a future steward. The focus is not on what the individual inherits, but on what he must carry forward. This has economic implications, though they are not stated explicitly. If wealth is viewed primarily as a right, it is often consumed, enjoyed, distributed according to personal preference. But if it is viewed as a responsibility, its function changes. It must be preserved, structured, prepared for transfer. The individual becomes a link, not an endpoint. This shifts behavior. Spending is evaluated not only in terms of present satisfaction, but in terms of future impact. Decisions are not isolated. They are connected to those who will come after. This is the first layer. The second appears in the treatment of land. In Leviticus, land is distributed among families. It is inherited, passed down, retained within lineage. But as noted earlier, the text introduces a limitation. The land is mine, you are strangers and sojourners with me. This reframes the relationship. The family holds the land, controls it, benefits from it, but does not own it absolutely. This introduces responsibility. The land must be maintained, not exhausted, not neglected, because it is not merely an asset, it is an inheritance and a future obligation. This structure prevents a particular type of behavior, short-term extraction. If a man believes he owns the land completely, he may maximize its output without regard for its condition. But if he understands that it must be passed forward, his approach changes. He preserves, he manages, he restrains. This is not enforced through constant supervision. It is embedded in the framework. The individual knows that what he holds is not solely for himself. This knowledge shapes his decisions. The same pattern appears in financial obligations, tithes, charitable giving, support for the vulnerable. These are not presented as optional acts of generosity. They are structured duties. A portion of income is designated, not based on emotion, but on principle. This introduces predictability, consistency. Resources flow not only toward personal accumulation, but toward communal stability. This has an economic effect. It reduces disparity, prevents isolation, ensures that the system remains functional. But more importantly, it reinforces the mindset. Wealth is not a private possession, it is a shared responsibility. This does not eliminate ownership, it contextualizes it. The individual retains control, but his control is directed toward obligations that extend beyond himself. The modern misunderstanding arises when this structure is viewed through a different lens. Contemporary frameworks often begin with rights: what is owed, what is deserved, what can be claimed. Responsibility, if considered, follows afterward. As a secondary layer, this sequence produces a different outcome. When rights are primary, the individuals focus on acquisition, on securing their portion. Responsibility becomes negotiable, variable, dependent on personal preference. This introduces instability, because the system relies on voluntary compliance, on individual willingness. The Hebrew framework reverses the sequence. Responsibility first. Rights, where they exist, are balanced within that structure. This produces a different type of stability, not dependent on individual inclination, but on consistent expectation. Each person knows what is required and acts accordingly. There is also a psychological dimension. A rights-based mindset centers the individual, his needs, his desires, his claims. A responsibility-based mindset shifts the center outward, toward others, toward the system, toward continuity. This affects decision-making. The individual asks different questions. Not only, what can I gain, but what must I uphold? This introduces restraint, not imposed, but internal. Over time, this becomes habitual. Decisions align with structure. Behavior becomes consistent. This consistency has economic value. It reduces unpredictability, increases reliability, strengthens relationships, because others can anticipate behavior. Trust is not based on assumption, but on observed adherence to responsibility. This creates a stable environment for exchange, for cooperation, for long-term planning. There is also a generational effect. When responsibility is emphasized, each generation prepares the next, not only through inheritance, but through instruction. The child grows up understanding not only what he will receive, but what he will be expected to do. This continuity is critical, because wealth without structure dissipates. It requires maintenance, and maintenance requires responsibility. The system ensures that this responsibility is not forgotten. It is taught, repeated, embedded. At this point, the central principle begins to emerge more clearly, though it has been present throughout. Wealth, in the Hebrew framework, is not an entitlement. It is an assignment, something to be managed, preserved, directed, not only for personal benefit, but for the stability of the larger system. This does not diminish its value. It enhances it, because it aligns wealth with purpose, rather than allowing it to exist as an isolated resource. The tension with modern culture becomes apparent here. A system focused on rights encourages immediate utilization, consumption, display, individual satisfaction. A system focused on responsibility encourages continuity, preservation, structure, long-term thinking. Neither approach eliminates wealth, but they produce different outcomes. One expands quickly, but often contracts just as quickly. The other grows more slowly, but endures. This endurance is not accidental. It is the result of consistent alignment between resource and responsibility. The individual does not act independently of the system. He operates within it, guided by obligations that extend beyond his immediate interest. And so the structure holds, quietly, across generations, not through force, but through expectation. Each person carries a portion. Each decision reflects that weight. And in that weight, something is preserved, not only wealth, but the system that allows it to continue. The Hebrew texts do not present this as a theory. They present it as practice, a way of living that prioritizes duty over claim, responsibility over entitlement. And in that ordering, they introduce a principle that remains understated but decisive. Wealth that is treated as a right is easily spent. Wealth that is treated as a responsibility is carefully kept. Not because it cannot be used, but because it must be carried forward.